Hey, everybody. Donna from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I'm so pleased to have Pete Christlieb here. He is our first time guest on our Everything Saxophone Podcast. When I was speaking with Dale Underwood and I interviewed him a couple of episodes ago, he suggested, hey, have you called Pete? And I'm like, no. So I messaged him and we were able to make this work. So welcome to the podcast, Pete.
I'm honored. Thank you.
And, I've been reading up a little bit, on some of the bios and some of your interviews. John DeVersa was one of the interviews that you did recently as well. And there was something, though, that in your bio that I was curious about. And Chet Baker is one of my all-time favorites. And apparently there's a story that he owes you $300 and gas money.
Chet Baker owes everybody.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
No, he, being a junkie, his standards of life are different than everybody else's. It's okay to steal. It's all right to get people all the way to Denver, Colorado, or Boulder, Colorado, or wherever we were, I forget. And we were playing Pueblo. We were in Pueblo, Colorado, and I met these wonderful guys, two guys from my town and another guy, a drummer, who we became great friends. And it was a wonderful band. And we made a lot of great music together. It was beautiful. But when it came time to pay, he drew all the money across the bar and split. I mean, we were there it was supposed to be 2 weeks. And after the first week, and I was just a youngster, and it was my first wife, and we were high school sweethearts or whatever. And then this was my first job when I went out with Chet.
Wow, first job.
When you go out with a junkie, this is now 100 years later. When you go out on a road with a junkie, you want to get your money first. Get your money first before you go anywhere, because if you go under those terms, you're never going to see it. And he stiffed everybody, not just me. But you get all that out of the way, and they say, well, did I get anything out of this? It was I had tapes, and they have disappeared over the years. I had tapes of us playing on that gig, and he was amazing. There were times where he played a whole chorus in one breath. I mean, because that's the way when the ideas were flowing, he just kept on going. He didn't bother to breathe. He just played, It was magic for him, music. It's his personal life that was all screwed up. And it took a long time to separate the two, and say, well, it was interesting playing with that one of the greatest natural players ever, and not take him personally,
Yeah. That must have been interesting and quite frankly pretty hard, because you're on this job with him, right, for 2 weeks, and you said that this was I guess one of your first jobs, and you learned an invaluable lesson, unfortunately. But I guess the thing, though, is that I guess that separation between, here's this person that's just so incredibly creative, but their personal life is fraught with a whole bunch of problems, and it's just hard to sometimes reconcile that.
Exactly. And at first I got a call, and it was in LA, and Chet was living in LA. He was living down near the beach area down there, closer to where I grew up, playing my first gigs and things, and meeting my first teacher, Bob Cooper, and I played at the Lighthouse. I went there as a kid because it was a place that you could hear jazz, and you're a youngster, you could go in and hear jazz because they served food, and a lot of the jazz places in LA were places you had to be 21 to get in, and And that's a hindrance when you're a youngster wanting to hear music. I couldn't go hear Miles or Coltrane or anything if they got anywhere near us, because these were clubs that, you had to be of age to get in.
Yeah.
And, it's not like you crawl under the circus tent and you could see the whole thing for nothing,
So that made it kind of hard. But
Yeah. But then I became, the Lighthouse was my friends. So many of my friends, like one of my greatest friends, I have to have his picture over here on the wall, Bud Shank. Bud was one of the Lighthouse All-Stars. Bob Cooper, of course, was the first time I went there. I met him and I talked to him, and he was a great player. And it turns out he was learning how to make reeds, oboe reeds, from my father, who was a reed expert and a bassoonist who was one of the all-time great bassoon players, and had a reed business on the side. And my father worked at 20th Century Fox in the orchestra and made 750 motion pictures at 20th Century Fox in his 50 years there. And
Wow.
a lot of my teachers were in that orchestra,
I'm curious. So your dad, was a legendary bassoonist, right? Double reed player.
Right.
I'm curious as to why maybe you didn't start on that. I read that you started on violin.
Yeah, I started on the violin. Well, when I was old enough to realize what's going on around me and musically and everything, because there was music in the house all the time, because he was Dad put together woodwind ensembles and things, concerts, and there was music in our house a lot, and there was Stravinsky coming in through the door all the time. He put the musical organization, he put the band together with all the guys for Stravinsky and did concerts with Stravinsky when he came to California. And so he was in our house all the time, and you could take that for granted, but when you're 6 or 7 years old, but it was kind of amazing. There's a man who shook the world, and I took a lot of pictures of him, and he didn't like pictures being taken of him, but I was just a youngster, so he didn't mind. But there's a lot of pictures in our library of him working and conducting and things like that. So at any rate, I was sitting next to a violin player in one of the rehearsals, and I just said, "Oh, maybe that would be interesting." It didn't occur to me I should be playing my dad's instrument, because I wasn't old enough to have those kind of thoughts. It was just what I heard, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to do that." So next thing I know, I got a violin. And my first teacher was, of course, all the people I was involved with were people my dad worked closely with in the 20th Century Fox Orchestra. And a lot of times he was babysitting, and I would go to work with him. And I'd sit there, and they'd be putting music to motion pictures, and I'm sitting there listening, taking all this in, And I tell you, when you sit in the middle of a symphony orchestra, and you get that sound around you, and you kind of know that this is really what you want to be involved with in your life, is music, But the jazz thing didn't come till later, when they had a few jazz records in the house, and I was all alone in the house, and I put one of these records on, and it happened to be a record that was Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker.
Okay.
Yeah, and here they're making up their music, making up their own music, and they're having a ball. And I think that sounds like fun, man. Wow, that really sounds like a lot of fun, and it is fun. It's still fun. I mean, being able to make up your own music, and I know from playing violin a recital, and working on pieces, and my father was my coach, and
Okay. Like he even coached you on the violin?
well, yeah, that's why he couldn't coach me on saxophone, because that's when things got out of hand for mom and dad. They were very upset that I wasn't going to be Yasha Heifetz,
Okay.
but nobody's Yasha Heifetz. He was one of a kind, and everybody still thinks that he's, God on the violin. So, which is true, because when you hear him play, it's unmistakable, But what happened was I listened to these records, and I was in I got into junior high school, and I went to the band teacher because I was playing violin in the orchestra, and I went to the music teacher and I said, I want to play a saxophone. And he said, sure, come on over here. And he was a saxophone player. Okay. And he picked out a horn. I knew there was, because listening to Jerry Mulligan, I said, well, that's a saxophone. I want to play a saxophone. But I didn't know there was a baritone, an alto, a tenor, a soprano. Okay. And he picked out a tenor. So that's why I'm playing tenor, Actually, when I got into playing professionally, I had to play them all. Because you didn't have a choice. When they call you to go to work, you have to bring everything.
Right. Okay, so then that's how you got started on.
That's how I got started on tenor saxophone, and then I started listening to people. Of course, being in already been exposed to Jerry Mulligan. I had a lot of Jerry Mulligan records, but he in turn was putting bands together with different people like Zoot Sims and Al Cohn, and even Stan Getz, who, and so I started buying all kinds of records that with all these people on it. So it's easy to find source material for your life ambition. Yes. You go in the music store and, hey, listen to this guy and listen to that guy. And I was, I was being influenced by these people. They had a lot to do with the way I play.
Were you transcribing so you started?
No.
Okay.
No, I did everything through. I played by ear, and that's a very interesting point. My father taught me how to play the violin. Fear, intimidation, and light beatings. Yes. Mom was always behind the door screaming, "Don't beat him!" I said, we're gonna get this right, and it takes all night. Dad was he was a taskmaster, but I managed to play. I was playing the violin okay, but the one thing he forgot to was all his instruction was great, but I did my recitals and everything, and then my teacher says, "Here's something I'd like to hear you play," and it never occurred to my dad, and obviously me, that I never actually learned how to read.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My teacher says, play this. And I just stared at it, and he looked at me, and he looked at my dad, and he threw us both out in the street.
Okay.
So it's great. It's like a Laurel and Hardy movie, I said, but Dad, he said, shut up. Hey, come on, Dad, shut up, So now it's, now it took a while to learn how to read. I mean, eventually I learned how to read, and eventually, I started playing in the high school band, and
Okay.
and it all through life, I managed to meet a lot of these people that I grew up listening to. I managed to meet a bunch of them and play with them. That was one extraordinary thing that I could say. I mean, I listened to these people, and then next thing you know, I went on the road with a band, and I'm sitting next to them.
Yeah, yeah. No, that must have been incredible. And
I mean, it's like, yeah, wow, yeah, and actually being able to tell them. I mean, Al Cohen was wonderful. We were playing a jazz festival together. This guy, and he was a jazz entrepreneur or entrepreneur. He put on these big jazz parties in Denver, and his name was Dick Gibson, and he had a famous party that everybody went to. Everybody went to the Dick Gibson jazz party, and if you were somebody who could play, you were invited to come and play, and you got paid, and you got a hotel room, and you played, and the thing went on for 3 or 4 days, and you got to play with a lot of people, and I got to play with some of the people that I grew up listening to. One of them was Eddie Lockjaw Davis.
oh, talk about that. That must have been amazing.
Oh, well, nobody played like him. He had a different mechanism in going for him. He used false fingerings to create his lines. So he'd play a note in one fingering and play it again, and he could actually, do this at any tempo. So it had a sound all of its own. The way and nobody really sounds like Eddie Davis. If you've ever spent any time listening to Lockjaw Davis, he's got his own thing completely. And I really liked it, and I liked him, and all through my early years, I got to hang out with him, and that was a great. Well, those things disappeared. The jazz festivals and the jazz parties and things like that.
Yeah.
That all kind of went away, and
Well, let me ask you something. Was there any, aside from the false fingerings, like did you ever ask, Eddie Davis like for any tips? Did he ever share any tips with you or anything like that?
well, I think that I got all my information through my ears.
Okay.
I got the influence. I didn't have to diagnostically take this apart. I just, I did it. I let whatever they had to offer be an influence. And like, if you talk about influences, that I did a lot of playing with Warne Marsh, and Warren was one of the most unique, different players, and knowing how he learned to do what he did with 20 years of schooling with Lenny Tristano, and he turned this whole thing around. Mechanically, he learned to play 4 different things happening, 4 or 5 different things happening at the same time, playing in harmonic, playing in different time, a different time against a different time, a time against a different time, 3 against 4, 4 against 5,
Got it.
and he could walk on the ceiling, and all this is going on, and he learned to be able to focus on a point where he knew exactly where he was at all times in this tune.
Mm.
And he could take this thing as far out as the moon and come back and still know exactly where he was at every point, at every juncture of it. And it was amazing. It's, you know, we did a lot of recording together, and I asked him how he did it, and he said, "Well, if we get into it now, we'll never finish this recording because you'll be totally lost." Because it took me 20 years. You're not going to do it in 10 seconds, you know. And he wrote something out for me that I have buried somewhere. It's buried somewhere, because if you look at it, and the first thing it tells you to do is build a phrase for 4-bar phrase, and like da 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 da. Okay, now you play that about 3 or 4 times, and then you start a metronome. Click, 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 click. Da 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 da. Click, click, click. He says, "Now you got that. Now leave the click going. Click, 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 click. Now start the phrase a quarter of a beat later. Click a diddle 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 diddle. And so, but you're going to end up at the end of 4 bars in a quarter of a beat later. Okay, and you keep increasing the time, the distance.
Okay, that's cool.
So now it's a time warp. You see?
Yeah.
And you're getting used to sounding. It sounds like, if you've ever been in a recording studio as many years as I have, in a recording studio where they were using a tape, and they put they're running the tape through the machine. When they run the tape backwards, it goes. Well, sometimes that's the way it sounded when Warren was playing.
Maybe he was influenced by that. We don't know.
I know, yeah, maybe he was, you know. But that, you know, just realize it. And then, you know, we made an album. It could have been one of the greatest jazz albums. You know, it could go on in the Smithsonian. I mean, we got used to playing together. He would listen to me, and I would listen to him, and all the way, and during our, you know, while we are creating our own thing, we are being influenced by what the other is doing, playing together. Because he taught me we made a lot of albums or music together, where we take standard, the melodic is not there, that the changes for each tune that we picked, the standard tunes, we use the chord structure and make new melodies over it.
Got it. Okay.
And that became commonplace. It started with the bebop.
Right.
How many tunes are written over that Charlie Parker and Dizzy wrote over I Got Rhythm? I don't know, but there must be 1,000, you know, that have been created over those changes, you know. And so this is but this is in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, when we were playing. And we learned to play off of each other. And it's eerie that you could hear in the improvisation that what I had played 2 bars ago is starting to come out on his side, and what he played 2 bars ago is starting to come out on my side. So we're interacting with each other, and then sooner or later you get to a point where we're actually improvising in harmony.
Wow.
And that is like, to me, it felt like levitation. You know, your feet have left the ground. You're flying around the room. You know?
Yeah. I mean, how
it's
often does that happen?
unbelievable. And
Yeah.
we tried to create this effect, and we were doing an album for people who just didn't understand what we were trying to do, and it got put aside. And so did the project just went south. At any rate, other than the original influences from Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, and I hear a little bit of, not much Stan Getz. I think I was more interested, like when we were kids and the Milestones record came out, and we were all having jam sessions together, when you're kids and you jam and things that I don't think you see or hear much of that happening anymore. But we got together and we listened to Milestones record, and we listened, and Coltrane played, and everybody was like, man, what was that? Did you hear that? Play that again. Wow. And I was really influenced by Cannonball. Cannonball had this energy that was absolutely infectious. He'd roar through a tune, and his time was impeccable, and he had ferocity. He just roared through a tune, and it was amazing what he could do. He could fly, he'd fly around the room, and I got to meet him.
Oh, cool.
And I got, like I said, it's amazing that you grow up listening to people, and then eventually you get to meet them and maybe even play with them. And one was a guy who was loved worldwide. Shelly Manne was, a leader in, looked upon as quite an influence in jazz. When I was a youngster, he had his own club. He worked in the studios, and my father worked with him a few times. And he found out that I was starting to play jazz, and so I got to play at the Shelley's Manhole, where a place that I actually couldn't get in because I wasn't old enough. But he made I had a little band, and I got to play there. And later in life, I went on the road with Shelley Manne, and it was Connie Condoli and myself, and Mike Walford and Shelley. And anyway, I'm trying to remember the bass player because he was such a great friend. When you be 81 years old, memories go around like a merry-go-round. You have to grab one while it's going by.
Oh, Jesus. I think you're doing
and
fine.
hold on to it long enough to try and remember it again. Monty Budwig.
Okay, that's it. Okay,
What's
cool.
his name? Monty Budwig was the bass player, and he made jazz history. A lot of people at Count made jazz, but Count was, Charlie Parker said, there's a new kid in town. His name is Connie Condoli. When you get a chance, go by and listen to him. But I ended up working with him for 20 years on The Tonight Show. But he and I played together in a club forever. He had a gig, and I was subbing for Frank Rossellino, and I played with Frank or play with Count, whoever's in town in this one club. And it was heaven. They were two greatest jazz players on the planet,
Well, everybody that you're mentioning is just incredible. I just want to go back to something that you said before, though. I want to go back to Warne Marsh, and you said that you guys had this this connection, right? That it's just, it's once in a lifetime type of, like, when you think about it, type of connection. Are you saying that album never got produced? It never got put out?
It came out, but
Okay.
it came out. And some of what we're talking about, the problem was the producers. They were come from someplace else, and so they didn't hear it the way we were hearing it. So we managed to get some of what we were trying to do. Because see, on our album, I put out Warne and I put out an album, and I ended up. It was put out by a company in Holland, because I spent some time in Holland, and I met this guy, and he says, I understand you have a bunch of tapes of you and Warren. I said, yeah, we were going to put an album out. Then I got involved with these other people, and we made this album, an album. Then it came out. I'll tell you, Warren, he got discouraged because of what was going on, because what we were trying to do wasn't really being put on the tape.
Oh.
We put it on tape, but it wasn't being used. They were going to take and use what they wanted. And so that led me to eventually decide that I wasn't going to let anybody record me anymore. I was going to start my own label and record things the way I wanted to do them.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that came from that.
That was like, it's like breaking out of a prison camp.
Wow. Okay. All right. So
having people crack the whip over your head and have you dance through a hoop and stuff like that, rather than being a play what you thought you want to sound. What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, this is what I wanted to be when I grew up, and so
yeah.
that's why you start your own thing, and millions of people have done that. And my father taught me how, because he did it with classical music. Classical music was under the thumb for so many years because it wasn't popular enough for the people producing music to carry the ball anymore. They weren't producing great things anymore. When I was growing up, my dad started producing Hindemith. He did an anthology on Hindemith, who was one of the greatest composers.
Yeah. And
very incredibly infectiously, his music was fantastic. And
no, I love Hindemith, and I grew up playing trumpet, so I played the Hindemith Sonata. So I know, he's just...
Well, he recorded all that stuff and put out volumes. My dad did.
That's
and
cool.
He got involved with all that. But he just taught me that you could put out your own records. So what you do is you record the thing, then you take it over here, and you have a master made. Then you take it over here, and you have them duplicate it, and then you have a artist draw up an album cover, and then you put this with that, and then you take it out and you sell it. Well, getting into the record business was, boy, that was a lesson. Oh God.
When did you start? Around what
that
time?
was in my first record that I put out was in 1980.
Okay, got it. So around 1980.
It was self-portrait.
Right. Okay, that's right. Okay. If you could just have the camera more on you, it's a little hard to...
I'm pointing at the ceiling. That's my ceiling. Yes. No. What happened was I was really I felt really good about it, being able to put the music together, and it came together well. I had the chemistry was right. This album that this first album, and I had a lot of my friends who I played with on the album. I called it Self-Portrait. I took a picture of myself, and then and then that became the cover. And then on the back, I put the pictures all around the back of all the people that were involved with the thing, and quite a mixture of influences and things. It wasn't, a lot of different moods and things that didn't have, one didn't have a whole lot to do with the other, but it was interesting to listen to.
Complimented. You all complimented.
Well, pop music, they can play the same tune and the same feel, the next tune, the same feel, the next tune. But some people think that's great, but it's boring as hell. Called rock and roll.
So for this album though, you had people that had different, it just
Oh
it was
yeah,
different.
and it featured people, you know. Uh, Warren and I were on that. We got together and we played, and the band that I played with Warren was my bass player Jim Hewart. Lou Levy was the piano player, and Warren and I, and we put that out. I put it together, and then I ran into a situation that, it was like a lesson. It was another lesson of business records. It's one thing to make a record and enjoy it and have it for posterity or as a record of how nice things could be when you get together and do it right. But when you try to get into a commercial situation here, and the first problem I got was the jazz station in Los Angeles was run by a guy who owned several stations, but the disc jockeys, the one that I knew, his name was Chuck Niles, and he had a great jazz program, and everybody loved Chuck, and he showed up to all the jazz concerts and was the MC and everything. Well, I got with Chuck, and I said, I'm going to put an album together, and I want to get it played on the radio. But there are rules, and there are situations, and you have to get an album played on a jazz station. You have to submit the album. So I submitted the album to my favorite jazz station, and there were some other albums that I had played on that people were listening to, that I was hearing myself play with this band or that band or things like that. Later in life, it was more, well, we'll talk about that later, but I decided I would, because they were having commercials, I would buy some commercials and put the album up for sale, mail order.
Okay.
Because I wasn't hooked with a record company. I had a deal with a record company because I was working for somebody who was connected to a record company. But as soon as the record that we were involved in was over with, this deal that they made me a deal. I signed with the record company because these people got me a deal, and it was 5 records with 5 options from other records. It was a great deal on paper. But somewhere in this contract that I signed, on page 347 in small print, it said, "This contract is null and void anytime we feel like it."
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, in other words, this is not worth anything. You are absolutely helpless. So,
okay.
what you signed was a piece of paper that you didn't have somebody look through it, and you just signed a useless piece of paper. So that's why I decided to put my own records out. But then what I'm trying to say is that now I got into the record, the world of trying to be successful as a record producer and get records played. And the first thing I took out these commercials, and they were playing the commercials, but they weren't playing the record. So how could people want to buy something that they've never heard?
Yeah.
So I went to the people at the record the the radio station, and I said, you know, I'm running these ads at X amount of money. I paid $300 or $400 for these ads, but they mean nothing unless the record's being played. They said, well, records are being played. We have a staff of people that review these records and decide whether they're good enough to be played on our station. I said, well, you're already playing me, on all these other records. And I said, I just wanted to see if I could save a few bucks and wait till, I'm sure that it on its own volition, it'll get played because it's a great record. It deserved to be. As a matter of fact, it got nominated for a Grammy.
Wow. And so they weren't,
and I didn't do anything. I had no political pull or anything. I just submitted it. And next thing you know, it's one of the 5 records, the best jazz records. It got nominated for a Grammy.
Are you, if you just have the camera on you again,
Yeah. Okay.
Is this the self-portrait one, or is this?
Yeah, it was self-portrait. My first record.
Okay. And so they weren't playing it. And so what you're saying is like,
well, what they accused me, they accused me of trying to, influence, which payola, yeah. And the truth of the matter was payola was really, you could hear some disc jockeys would play one record 2 or 3 times in 3 hours.
Yeah.
If that isn't payola, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Oh, they were taking money on the side, but I wasn't one of the players. I was just a new kid on the block, and they rubbed my nose in it. They said, yeah, get out of here. You're banned. Take your record and go someplace else. Because I spoke up for what I really thought I should get, and they told me, you get the door. I got completely thrown out of that deal, and I almost got the guy who got me in the door fired. Yeah, Chuck Niles, who was a mainstay on that station, and so he ruined our relationship, and it was a nightmare. Wow. Trying to get involved. And then on the other hand, selling records. I was selling through there used to be a record store that was nationwide called Tower.
Oh yeah, I know. I was talking with somebody. I worked at Tower Records in Long Island, so I love Tower Records actually.
Yeah. And I sold records to them, and they were very happy to sell my records and things like that. But that situation, you agreed to send them records, and they would sell them. But on the other hand, if records were returned, you had to buy them back.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You had to buy them back.
Yeah.
And so I ran into this situation where if you're in a college town, one guy goes to the Tower record store and he buys your record, then he takes and runs off 300 copies to all his friends. So you're very big in that town, but you've only sold one record because you've been duplicated and spread real thin.
Yeah. You know what's interesting though, Pete, with this story, the modern day equivalent of that, has been, well, with Spotify, in a sense. And even before that, like in the very late 1990s to early 2000s, when there was LimeWire and Napster and some other things out there where you could get access to, people's singles and records and whatnot. But even now today with Spotify, and unless you're Taylor Swift, you're getting fractions of a penny for every time it's streamed.
I'm getting nothing.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's difficult.
I know that iTunes and other people have taken my music and offered it, and they've never contacted me, and I never received a penny from all those albums that I made on my own with my own money. And I have, I mean, I haven't figured out how much money it would cost me to go after them with a lawyer.
Yeah, no,
I
the hard.
think it's just damn near impossible.
It's if you're not, like I said, if you're not, a superstar in the pop world, for jazz musicians, it's really hard, and that's why a lot of jazz musicians that I speak to will sell their records through Bandcamp, and then a lot of times on Fridays throughout the year, Bandcamp will like be giving the artist a little bit more money from the sales. So, it's these other things that people are pursuing where you're getting something for what you put out there. It's something, if no one's spoken to you about that, when we're done, we could talk about that, afterwards. But yeah, I mean, it's important because, you want to get compensated for what you did. But I want to shift the story a little bit because there's something that I was also very curious about too. So you started on violin, you heard saxophone, you're like, I want to play this. Your junior high teacher played saxophone, got you started on a tenor. Did you take any lessons or anything like that? Did he teach you?
Yeah, well, my first teacher was his name was Ralph Lee, and he was a fine saxophone player. And he was studying with my father, learning how to play the bassoon, because when you're working in a to make money, unless you're an established, it's impossible. I mean, unless you're an established jazz artist signed with people and you're playing all over the world and you're selling records, and a lot of people are just putting money into your act and you're just riding the wave. You're just playing and having a great time. But it doesn't work like that for, you just, it's only in the movies that it happens like that. In real life, it doesn't happen that way. And so anyway, Ralph, he learned how to play the bassoon so he could play in the studios, because the more doubles you play, like when I did Star Trek for 18 years with a kid that a guy who I grew up with. We were working on the same show together, and his name was Dennis McCarthy, and he was playing piano, backup piano for Glenn Campbell, and I was working in the band, the studio band downstairs, and he asked me, Dennis asked me, I want to write music. And I said, well, I gave him some records out of my father's library of, that I had. And he went and studied for these people, and he became an absolute monster writer. The next thing I know, I'm working for Dennis McCarthy, and he did it. We worked for 18 years at Star Trek, and I got to play, but on that, I was playing clarinet, flute, alto flute, tenor sax, E-flat contra bass clarinet, and once in a while, a little tenor sax. I figured that there must be some kind of rule in outer space that they don't like tenor sax or jazz in outer space. They want violins and flutes and serious music, none of this jazz music in outer space, please,
Gosh, but that sounds like a great gig. And then,
it was a great gig, and it went on for a long time. And I put my kids through school and bought a house. That's a big deal. Buying a house these days. Wow. You could buy a house, man. You're really doing good.
No, that's very true. That's very true. So, all right. So that you got the Star Trek, gig. We were talking about your first teacher and talking about studio work. And
yeah. Then my next teacher was Bob Cooper, because I found out he was at the lighthouse, when I went to the lighthouse, and then a friend of mine was producing records. And so we got together and put a band together, and it's called Mosaic, and Bob Cooper and I, and it was a great record. It didn't do really well. We were putting it out ourselves, and they were the guy who distributing it through his system. Getting distribution is tough, getting hooked up with distribution. If you're not a main label, you have to go through people. And a lot of times I've had a lot of records just disappear.
Wow. Yeah.
They take them. Yeah, right. I got them. Yeah, great. And then they sell them and they take the money too. They disappear.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh.
That's learning the hard way again,
Yeah, no, that's certainly it seems like a lot of, hard lessons that you've learned over the years. And I'm just curious though, like with, with your teacher Bob Cooper, like what was there any one particular, whether it was tip or exercise that, he had you do that stands out in your head that, you felt was really helpful for you?
Well, I was already playing with the influences of people that I had listened to, but we went through like a lot of people, the thesaurus book, melodic scales and melodic patterns. That became the Bible for jazz musicians to go through and use these scales to create music on. Nicholas Slaminsky.
Okay.
And he wrote this book, and you wouldn't believe that my 20 years on Johnny Carson's show, Johnny even had Nicholas Slaminsky come out and sit and talk on his couch.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. Can you believe that? Well, the one thing about being involved with that show for 20 years, besides the fact that there was never a moment that there wasn't something funny happening.
That was a great show.
It was humor central.
I got to ask you though, what was the funniest moment that you remember when you played on that show?
Oh, but it's hard, it's really tough to pinpoint one or the other. There were some that they'll show clips of things that we did every year we did an anniversary show, and they had this one where the guy came on. He was an actor named Ed Ames, and Ed was it was a television show he was on, and he was an Indian, and Johnny had him bring his tools with him, which was he was throwing axes at a target. He threw this axe at this cowboy, and it landed right in his crotch with the handle sticking up. And obviously, the crowd went crazy.
Oh.
And his handle sticking up, and he was going to go over there and grab it, and Johnny stopped him. He said he wanted the laugh to go on forever, and it did. Yeah, that was one of the all-time funniest things that ever happened on our show.
Probably on TV. So
you'd never see anything like that on TV if it wasn't for Johnny Carson.
Yeah, he was awesome. How did you get that gig? How did you get that gig with the Johnny Carson show?
Well, I got it through another one of my fathers. I was on the road with different bands. Before you get a great, you go out on the road and then you come back and you try to make something of yourself. And because that's what we did when in those days. Kids can't do that anymore because they're in bands. You can't earn while you learn. Um, you know, the big band era was. I played on maybe, let's see, how many bands did I? Well, the guy who got me the gig was Louis Belson. Louis Belson was,
Okay.
you know, I went out on my first band was the Cy Zentner band. Cy Zentner was a trombone player, and he worked at MGM with my father in the 30s. But he had a record that he had a hit record on a Up a Lazy River tune that he written by Bob Florence, who I worked with. And I was on that band for a year, and then I went to Woody Herman's band. And after Woody Herman's band, I went on Louis Belson's band. And I stayed with Louis for, God, I knew, it must have been 30 years. And Louis was like a second father to me. And I even produced a record for Louis Belson called Louis Don't Stop Now. And we sold a few of them. And, it's still, the record business was the way, it went the way, eventually, don't you feel like it's in some way that the record people are starting to listen to records again?
Well, actually, a lot of people are self-producing, and doing their own thing. But
I mean, listening to vinyl.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah, that's what the point I was trying to make, vinyl, like, okay, what's the big deal? I mean, we got it to a science. I've had my records made by the greatest vinyl producer and people. Just being involved in the process, watching them, cut a lacquer, a tool. They have a lathe that cuts the lacquer. And I learned this, that they're on records. I don't know how it is now because technology changes, but records, the 12-inch, right? 12-inch records. There's just so much music you can get on a 12-inch record. How much time, how many you got 48 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that, 48 or 50 minutes. It all depends on how loud the music is.
Okay, and I'm not familiar with this at all. I know that.
Well, when the stylus is making the sound, the louder the sound, the wider the stylus is. So that's starting to narrow the amount of lacquer you have left to make music on. So that's how you come up with 50 minutes, 55 minutes at the most of loud music. Or if it's really soft music, you could probably get 60 minutes on there. But if it's a big loud piece, it's like the gas pedal and the gas tank.
No, that's a great analogy. That's an awesome. I'm even also thinking about classical music, and you compare.
Yeah, that's well, the classic. I think the classical music is the standard of how that works.
Yeah, like you compare like Mahler. You have Mahler symphonies compared to like some Mozart concertos. A Mahler symphony is going to take up a lot more space, is what you're saying. But no, that's interesting. Actually, I didn't even realize that, at all. But I'm going to switch the topic for a second because you kind of alluded to it before. And I'm just very curious, though. You said, you trained, you listened, you just listened. There were a lot of influences through listening. A lot of these people you met later on, you played with them or you spoke with them. But when it came to improvisation, like, how did you start learning how to improvise?
I think it goes back to uh, you try to play. You listen to the way. The first thing that was Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan. It was the feeling of them creating the music, creating their own music melodically, and then and I made my attempt at it, as futile and as infantile as it was mine. And then my first teacher, the guy who was learning how to make bassoon reeds and learned from my father, who was actually a pretty fine jazz saxophone player, a great tenor saxophone player, he was actually, in the commercial music business. He was playing in radio shows and things like that. But he taught me. He says, "Well, this is a chord, and here's a tune." And I said, "I know that tune. I'm trying to play on it." So we take a tune, and he'd write out the changes to me, and then he gave me the cadences. A cadence. A cadence is 2 to 5 to 1. 2 to 5 to 1 is a molecular structure of just about every jazz tune, and it has its in classical music. It started in classical music, and it was outright robbed to make jazz music. And it's MC2 equals 251 equals. I got rhythm. All the things you are is 255 251 5215. It's like a phone number that never stopped. 512 2515. It's like, okay, if you're talking in numbers, 251 is, and then you start adding. Well, you have the tonic, the bass, and then the third and the fifth. Then you start adding sevenths and ninths, and flat 5, flat 9. Those things we wrote down and we studied those. We and then you compared them to what you're listening to, and then you say, well, this guy did that, and this guy did that, and to become fluent at it, you have to play with it. You have to, play through the changes and listen. And then the influence is what other people did with it.
Got it. Okay.
If you're listening to a great trumpet player, and you're just starting out, and you listen to the sound and the articulation, and how do you do that? What do you do to that? Well, how do you get the horn to go that? How do you get the range? Well, you have to do this and you have to do that. You have to practice this and that, and for jazz, it's listening to other people and saying, well, you could actually how did Charlie Parker? He turned people around so bad. I imagine it was in the movie I did with Clint Eastwood. I got to know him, and I did some work for him, and he's a really one of the great friends of jazz. He had jazz in his motion pictures. His kids play jazz.
Yeah.
He played jazz. He did the Bird movie, and there's a scene where some guy listened to Charlie Parker, and then he takes his horn and he throws it off the bridge into the river. And he says, man, I'll never be able to do that. But if that were true, then a lot of people wouldn't be playing. It's the will to do it. And for me, it was the will to go on the road and play and do my thing and leave the violin at home. And I'm not sorry.
Yeah, and we're not sorry either because
You know,
you play with so many people and you've had some,
yeah,
certainly
it
iconic
just
records.
and how that happens, it's amazing how it happens. Well, the basics is kids are playing and learning how to play, and then you tell them, well, I played. How did you get where you at? Well, first thing you learn how to play a little bit, and then you get in the band and you play, and then people hear you, and people won't hire you if they've never heard you. So you have to find a way to get airplay, get the word out. So they have to hear you playing. So playing in different people's bands was quite a help to get known and get other gigs. But I'll tell you, you can magnify that a million times, but by having a job like the Tonight Show and being able to play every night on television and have people come and tell you that in my life that if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be playing this horn.
Mm.
And I say, I'm so sorry. How can I help? You need a loan? You need a place to stay? Yeah, really.
No, but seriously, I mean,
I got you into this, didn't I?
no, but think about it though. In all honesty, joking aside, I mean, think about the influence you've had, with all of the studio work, with being on the Tonight Show, Steely Dan. How many people you've inspired, right, to start to play the saxophone. I mean, that must feel awesome.
Yeah. Wow, it's been a long time, and I don't know why I moved up here in Washington because one of my great friends my greatest friends of all time was Bill Ramsey, who is a fine writer and musician, player, and played. Bill, he lives up here in Tacoma, and he lived up here in Tacoma and passed away a couple of years ago. He had a band, and I played in his band. I met one thing that happened was that through my association with Bud Shank, who Bud was big in California in the music scene, and he was all over the screen, television and movies and things, and played with the Lighthouse All Stars and everything. And I got to play with him. He had me coming up here to play every summer in the music camp called Port Townsend Centrum Jazz Camp. And it was Bud Shank's camp. And I taught here for, over 18 years. I mean, over 10 years, 18 years. I don't know. I forgot how many. And I was coming up from California, and in the music scene, and Johnny Carson took time off. All the television in summertime, everything goes on hiatus, and there's not a lot of work. So the bills keep coming in. So what do? Well, this job was 7 days and paid about $1,600 in those days. And that was, it was a must. And then I started playing with Bill's band up here. And we got the idea, my wife and I we put a band together, and he loaned me some music, and we started the thing up in LA, and we had our band going there. And a lot of musicians that I used in the band. You imagine yesterday, one of my greatest friends of all time, Gary Foster.
Oh, yeah.
Gary passed away yesterday.
Yeah.
He was in my band. He and Warne Marsh were greatest of friends, and he and Lee Konitz, who was another Lenny Tristano exponent, along with Warren, and that's cool. Lee, I met Lee here.
Okay.
Yeah, he came to our camp. You know, I guess the point is you go through life meeting people, and it's like a monkey swinging through the trees, grabbing a branch and going on, and you meet these people, and guess who I swung a branch with today? You know.
Yeah, and that seems to be the theme with this. I was thinking about this, and it goes back from for the very beginning when you played violin and you learned by ear, right? And so
Yeah.
you're listening to influences, and then you're like, oh, I you put on this record, and you heard Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, and you're like, oh, and you were influenced by that. Your whole life was shaped by the people you listened
Well,
to and your influences.
when you stand up and play jazz, you know, uh, a lot of times, most of the time, if you're lucky, if you have a gig where you can just stand up there and play, and you play, I can stand up there without a music stand in my face, and I play 7 or 8 or 9, 10 tunes, maybe more in a night, and you don't have a music stand. You're playing off the top of your head. You're playing by ear, and this is where you have to learn. If you want to play, you have to learn how to go through the changes and create using the tools that we have, the chords. And you start with ideas of learning how other people do it. This is how this person went from 2 to 5 to 1. And then how did this guy go? Wow, he just used a substitute there. Where did that substitute come from? And then I realized later in life, when I turned on the television, and there was an opera of Richard Strauss, and getting towards the end of the compound chords, one chord on the top, one chord on the bottom, put the two together, and you got magic. And when was that? That's been going on in jazz for a long time, but where did it come from? 1890 something?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you thought you were original. Well, oisky boisky, just what I found out. It's nothing new, pal. When I tell other people, they want to know. They want to know how to do this, and it's you have to start somewhere, and you have to have influences, the basics. I didn't have the training that kids get today. Going to music school and going through systems and get a PhD in musicology. I like I said, I earned while I learned. I was on the road, and I took it. I learned from listening to other people, and it's all a natural here.
Yeah, no, you learned it on the bandstand. And I'm just curious, we're going to have to stop in a second, but, first of all, I want to thank you for your time, but I'm curious, do you have any projects coming up for this year in terms of playing and stuff?
Well, if anything, it's happened everywhere. This thing about the lack of places to play jazz, we had, when I moved up here, there was 5 or 6, there were several clubs that we were playing in. And then COVID came, and all these clubs who are working off a shoestring here of just going from night to night, because we got an audience last night, we can go on and have and all that, it disappeared. It's gone, and not to return. So I have a few places to play. There was a year here my wife and I had 2 jobs. We had 2 gigs. And the problem was they were both in the same week.
Oh no.
What about the rest of the year?
Wow. Okay.
And so it's hard to keep your face together. It's hard to play if there's no, so trying. So what we did was we said, well, we'll do we got enough money. Money's not the problem. We sold a house in LA for $800,000, paid this one off. I could live off of what I got left until I'm gone. But why don't we just put a record together, put a CD together, and we'll play. Well, at least we're playing and we're working on something.
Yeah.
So we do that. So we made a CD.
That's right.
And we put it out, and then we're playing in a couple of different places. While now we don't have to wait a year for a gig. We can actually play a couple months from now. We'll be playing here and we'll be playing there. But
That's good. I'm glad that.
Yeah, at least we're doing something. So I'm working on a project to build an album or a CD or whatever. CDs are going to disappear pretty soon, aren't they?
Yeah, unfortunately. But you were saying, so you're working on a project, another.
Yeah, we're going to do something with a guy that I'm one of his favorites. Okay, so
Cool.
It's more like that. He says, you were all, you were my influence and everything, and I want you to play. And I feel really lucky to have somebody who feels that way, so we can actually play every month or once every month or once every other month, but at least it's something there.
Yeah, but
so I decided what the hell? I can't take it with you. I'm gonna play. I'm gonna play tenor. I'm gonna play baritone.
But what's cool here, and again, this goes but with the theme, and this is a good way to wrap this up too. You found your influences. There were so many people that you were influenced by when you were younger, and all the great. I mean, think about it. Stravinsky too was in your living room. Like all these things, and now you've got this project coming up with someone who you influenced. How full circle is that? That's so awesome to hear. And so how will people find out about that? Is it through your website?
I don't know. I'd be the worst one to ask about that because I forget. I'm so busy doing other things that I forget I even have a website.
Okay,
how about that?
No worries on that. Well, we're gonna definitely link that up in our show notes for this podcast, so people can find that more about you, and see some of the other stuff, and see some of the projects you have with your wife, and some of the other great videos there. But Pete, I wanted to again thank you so much for your time. This was such a pleasure, and such great stories and such great tips too. I want to thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Now that all my friends are passing away, somebody's got to tell them a little bit about how it is or how it was. God, can you believe Sonny Rollins passed away the other day too?
I know. It was.
He was an influence. I could say he was an influence. He had this kind of raw, harsh kind of sound. It didn't sound like Cannonball or any of the other guys. Cannonball, they were at the time, and the melodic feeling he portrayed, he was so much different than Cannonball. That's what was interesting about Miles Davis in those days. That band was Heroes Coltrane coming from here and Cannonball coming from there, and we got to sit and talk in later life. After I met him, the first time I met him, I walked up to him and I said, when I grow up, I want to play just like you.
Oh, how cool.
And he says to me, "Sonny boy," he says, "you look just like Don Drysdale, who was the pitcher for the Dodgers." And everybody starts laughing. 10 years later, at least 10 years later, I'm playing with Quincy Jones on the stage in San Francisco. We're backing somebody like Roberta Flack and doing Quincy's music and everything. I got to stand up and play on a tune, maybe Manteca or something like that. And I get through, and there was a voice in the back yelled at me, and he said, "Hey, Don Drysdale." He said, "I know you could play." And I knew it was him. And I tell you, I got the goosebumps the size of an elephant. I tell you, man, I couldn't believe it was my favorite guy out there telling me I was okay.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And then later we got to hang. So I feel lucky to have been able to hang with him. And then on the Tonight Show, these are the two most amazing things in my life. And that'll be it. I took a picture of Pavarotti.
Oh, cool.
And I had a dark room, and I worked on it, and I worked on it, and I worked on it, and he was on the show. So I took this picture over with me to work, and he was on the show, and I gave him this picture, and he looked at me, and he was really taken by it. He says, "I remember the moment you took this picture when I was singing. I didn't know." And we became friends. That's right. The greatest tenor ever meets another tenor.
That is
so we could have been the two tenors.
No. That's right. Before the three tenors.
Yeah.
The precursor.
The two tenors, yes.
That's right. All right. Well, Pete, listen, thank you again so much. This was a lot of fun and some great stories. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Cool.
Okay, thanks.